Shalom Aleichem, this is Rabbi Kovacs. Today the Mishnah Yomi Shir begins Seder Nashim, the order talking about women, about relationships and marriages, and we start with Masechet Yevamot, tractate Yevamos. Now Yibum is often translated in English as levirate marriage, okay? So that's from the Latin word levir, of brother. So it's a brother marrying the widow of his deceased brother. We shouldn't have to know of such things. This is a mitzvah. It's a commandment that's described in Devarim, in Deuteronomy chapter 25. When brothers live together and one of them dies with no children, then the widow of the deceased can't marry an outside man. Rather, the Yavam, meaning the brother-in-law, the brother of the deceased, should live with her, take her as a wife, and Yibumate her. And the firstborn shall take the name of the deceased brother. We're going to find out it's not literally the name, but he stands in as the inheritor. So that name, that person who deceased, the bloodline, will not be wiped out from Israel. And then the verses talk about if they don't want to, the man and the widow and the brother don't want to get married, there's a procedure called chalitza. We'll learn about that in detail later, which will release her to marry anyone, just not one of the brothers of her deceased husband. Now, it's interesting, Yibum actually comes up earlier in the Torah, in Bereshis chapter 38, with Yehuda and Tamar, where Tamar had been married to two sons of Yehuda who passed away, and then ended up marrying Yehuda, finally, and bearing twins, Peretz and Zerach, as sort of stand-ins for the deceased sons, Er and Onan of Yehuda. There was also a quasi-Yibum situation when Boaz married Ruth, or Ruth. Ruth was actually not a widow of Boaz's brother, but Boaz was related enough that it was called Geula, not Yibum, where he could stand in and sort of do a Yibum-like situation. Now, the first Mishnah of Yevamot is quite complex. Actually, all of Yevamot is known to be complex. Yevamot is rated as one of the most difficult Masechdot in Shas, so we should not feel discouraged if this material is hard to understand on our first time through. And there are helpful charts that you can find in many of the ArtScroll Mishnayos and online and the Gemaras that sort of illustrate some of these relationship principles. So the first Mishnah is talking about a case where the deceased, the brother who passed away, left not only one widow, but more than one widow. Now, in ancient times, it was not unheard of for a man to marry more than one wife. So as we'll see, this might complicate the logistics, the eligibility of which wife, if any, is eligible to do the mitzvah of Yibum. So it reads, Chamesh Esrei Nashim, there are 15 women, Potrot Tsarotehem, who exempt their co-wives. They exempt themselves, of course, and also their co-wives, V'tzarot Tsarotehem, and future co-wives of their co-wife, Mina Chalitza or Mina Yibum. From Chalitza, the release ceremony we'll talk about later, and from the mitzvah of Yibum, of marrying the brother of the deceased husband. Ad Sofa Olam, and that chain can continue. We'll discuss in Mishnah Bet what that means. Be'eluhen, these are the 15. Bito, his daughter. Now, for example, there are two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven unfortunately passed away with no children, leaving two widows, Rachel, who is his brother's daughter, Shimon's daughter, and Sally, who's just not related at all. So not only is Rachel exempt from Yibum and Chalitza because the Yavam, the brother of the deceased, is her own father. It's an erva situation. There's no way they could possibly get married. But even Sally, the unrelated co-wife at the time of Reuven's death, is also exempt. The Mishnah continues listing these women. Bat Bito, his daughter's daughter. Bat Beno, or his son's daughter. Bat Ishto, his wife's daughter, even if it's his wife's daughter from a different marriage, a previous marriage. Bat Beno, the daughter of his wife's son from a different marriage. Bat Bita, or the granddaughter thereof. Hamoto, or the Yavam's mother-in-law. The Chamoto, the mother-in-law's mother. It could be that his deceased brother had married the mother of his mother-in-law. I understand people married young back then, as we'll see, so it is theoretically possible. The Chamov, the mother of his father-in-law. Achoto Me'imo, or his maternal sister, meaning Reuven and Shimon share a father, and they might even share a mother. Scrap that, they don't share a mother. Reuven and Shimon, the brothers in question, only share a father. they have separate mothers, and Shimon's mother also had another daughter from a different marriage, a previous marriage. So that woman is a sister of Shimon, but not related to Reuven. So Reuven could have married her, but then if a Yibum situation comes up, Shimon cannot. The Achot Imo, his mother's sister, again, Reuven and Shimon could have different mothers and the same father. Achot Ishto, or his wife's sister. This could come up where two brothers married two sisters, and then one brother passed away with no children. The Eshet Ochiv Me'imo, his maternal brother's wife, where Shimon had a brother from another mother, as they say in contemporary times, who is not related to the deceased, to Reuven, the deceased who died without children. And that wife of Shimon's brother, they were divorced, or that other brother from another mother had passed away, so she had been married to Reuven at the time of his death. Mishnah adds, Ve'eshet ochiv shelo haya be'olamo, meaning the wife of a brother who was not alive at the same time of the deceased brother. A brother who had been much older, had predeceased this situation. Vikalato, or Shimon's daughter-in-law. If Shimon's son had married this woman, and then there was a death or a divorce, and this woman is free to remarry. If she'd married Reuven, the deceased brother, there's no Yibum. The Mishnah repeats, Hare Elu, these women, Potrot Sarotean, they exempt their co-wives, obviously themselves. Sarot Sarotean, the co-wives of a co-wife, we'll talk about that in the next Mishnah. Mina Chalitza, Mina Yibum, Ad Sof Ha'olam, forever. The Chulan, but any of these women, any of these situations, Im Meitu, if the woman in question had died, the woman who was an erva, who was a relative somehow of the living brother, had actually died before Reuven, before the brother in question died with no children, O miano, or they refused the marriage. Now this comes up if a girl was married at a young age and her father was not in the picture. She was married before bat mitzvah. You understand, in ancient times, people grew up much faster. And in ancient times, a 12-year-old, we consider a child today, might have much more practical life experience and wisdom and exposure to real living than a 20-year-old would have today. There are 20-year-olds today who claim they don't understand the consequences of taking out student loans. So it might be that a 12-year-old back then was, you understand, a very different society. We're going to learn later in Kiddushin that the Mishnah and the Gemara, they recommend that someone should not marry off his daughter when she's very young until she's old enough to understand the consequences and the relationship and to make sure it's a good shidduch. So this marriage, this miyun marriage we'll learn about later, was a rabbinic marriage. And she can, when she becomes bat mitzvah, she can say, listen, I don't want to go through, I don't want to continue with the marriage. So then the marriage is as if it never existed. So if the disqualified woman walked out of the marriage, onit garsha, or they were divorced, oshin nimtsu ailonit, or they were found out to be an ailonit. An ailonit, we'll discuss later on, is a woman who doesn't have the normal female, feminine childbearing situation. And since she can't have children biologically, it's as if that marriage didn't exist in the first place. So if the problematic woman was out of the marriage to Reuven, the husband, the man who passed away, the brother who passed away, before he passed away, of course, then sarotean mutarot, then the co-wives, the other wife of Reuven, who is still his wife, the marriage did not end, would be mutar for Yibum or Chalitza. They're allowed to do Yibum Chalitza with the surviving brothers. Since the problematic marriage, the marriage to a relative of some sort, was already ended or nullified before that man passed away. But you couldn't apply this exemption bechamoto to the mother-in-law, because after all, a mother-in-law by definition has children. Ube'em chamoto, or the mother of the mother-in-law, ube'em chamav, or the mother of the father-in-law. Shenimsu islandit or sheminu. There's never a situation they could be an islandit because they had children already. That proves they're not islandits. They're able to have children. O miyanu, they couldn't do miyun because they have to be old enough to have children, and now their children are getting married. Now on to Mishnah Beit. Ketzad potret sortein. How do these 15 women exempt their co-wives? So now, thank God, there's a bit of review, and they spell out what happens. Haita bito o achat mikol arayo ta'elu nisud la'achiv. So if Shimon's daughter or any of these women we've listed was married to his brother Reuven, who died without children, v'lo isha acheret, and he was married to another woman, Sally, umet, when Reuven died, kishem shebito patura, just like the daughter, Shimon's daughter Rachel, is pater from chalitza or yibum, Kach tzarata, so to the other wife, Sally, Petura, is also pater. There's no chalitza, there's no Yibum. Now the Mishnah spells out what did we mean ad olam, that this continues. Holcha tzorat bito, nisit lochi v'sheni. So what if Sally goes and marries Levi, the third brother? V'lo isha acheret, and Levi already had another wife, Shprinza, umet, and now Levi died, and his two widows, Shprinza and Sally, are up possibly for Yibum. Kishem shetzorat bita petura. So just like Sally, who had previously been married to Reuven, the first brother to die, along with Rachel, the daughter of Shimon, so Sally's exempt. We know that because she was the co-wife with Rachel, the daughter of Shimon. Kach tzorat tzorata petura. So to Shprinza, who was the next co-wife to Sally, is also exempted. Afilu hen meya. Even if this chain repeats over 100 brothers, I don't think that's ever happened in real life, but technically it could. We will see in Masechet Yevamot there are certain cases that are quite outlandish or very extremely unlikely, and they're often brought just to identify the outer bounds and parameters and logistics of Yibum, not that they ever happened in real life. Now the Mishnah explains the end of Mishnah Aleph when we talked about a marriage ending before the death of the husband. Ketzad imeto tzorotein mutarot. What's an illustration of when one of the erva wives, the problematic wives, passed away, and then the co-wife would be allowed to do Yibum or Chalitza. Haita bito, if it was Shimon's daughter, Rachel, married to Reuven, or any one of these other women was married to his brother. V'lo isha acheret, he had another wife, Sally, totally unrelated. Meitza bito, onit garsha. So if the wife, who's the daughter of the brother, passed away or was divorced, and then after that, Reuven died. So when Reuven died, there was no relationship there anymore. Tzarata muteret. So Sally could do Yibum or Chalitza with Shimon. Now the Mishnah ends with a detail of miyun, the ending of a rabbinic marriage when the girl becomes a bat mitzvah and wants to walk out, doesn't want to continue. If this girl was able to do miyun, was able to walk out of the marriage and therefore eliminate the problem that was preventing Yibum, but she doesn't want to. Lamaisa, she picks, the young woman picks to continue the marriage. Tzarata, so any co-wife that the deceased brother had, along with this young woman who wanted to continue the marriage, she should get a chalitza, but not a yibum. Now the reason for this is that we said this miyun type marriage. She was very young, and this marriage was recognized rabbinically, but not biblically. So she's rabbinically married to the deceased brother, and when he dies, she's a rabbinic yevama, but that's not enough to knock out the biblical Yevama of the co-wife, who was older, and that was really a biblical marriage. So on a biblical level, the older co-wife should be eligible for Yibum, but since she was married, her co-wife, at least rabbinically, was a relative, one of these 15 relatives to the surviving brother. She needs to do Chalitza to release her, but she cannot do Yibum because that looks like one of these problematic situations. Again, this is difficult, complex material. This is among the most difficult material in all of Shas and all of Jewish law. So Baruch Hashem Yeshar Koach that we are delving into it, God willing.